episode of the AV Experience. I'm your host, Ryan Charpentier from Ascend Audio Video. We are not joined by Ben Goff today. He is doing repairs on his ceiling, but we are joined by the ever more beautiful Peter Aylett from Cinema Bureau. Yes, and Officina Acustica. You guys have so many titles that I'm just like, I don't know where you're from.
I get lost sometimes. Don't
I
worry.
get lost.
All good.
I always get lost in your hair. It's always magnificent.
Many
But anyway,
people.
you just got back from Vienna.
I did.
Not just, but a little bit ago. And we're going to talk about Vienna. So we don't have much time today. So we're just going to jump straight into it. And this is mainly going to be you talking because I wasn't there. You were there. What happened? What was it like?
I guess a lot of listeners, viewers, whoever you are probably thinking, well, what's Vienna? Why do you want to talk about Vienna? If I say Munich, a few of you might go, oh, Munich, there's a hi-fi show that happens there every year, isn't there? Well, it used to be in Munich, but apparently the story is, although I think this might be an urban myth, that the MOC in Munich, that was the show venue, which was quite a unique venue, is owned by BMW, and BMW want their building back. So they moved the show to the Austria Center, which is in Vienna. And it's a show that I go to every year if I can. And it's one of those shows that every time I go, I think to myself, oh, why am I going? You know, it's just full of snake oil and audiophilia and people talking nonsense. And yeah, that is a little bit true, but it's also the world's biggest audio show. If you're into audio, you're into the reproduced arts, you're into speakers and amplifiers and turntables and cables and, you know, everything about audio, it is the world's biggest audio show. And this year was interesting. Actually, it was definitely a different vibe to Munich. And one of the things that I think most people don't like hi-fi shows for is the fact that you have this hotel that is just crammed full of hi-fi exhibitors. You have rooms next to each other, which is a problem, because if you want to play something quiet, the room next door blasts you out. If you want to play something loud, you're going to blast out the room next door. Now, interestingly, and especially for everyone listening from the US, which I suspect is most of you, there's a show every year in Schaumburg on the outskirts of Chicago called Axpona. And that's a really, really, really good audio show. That's basically the second biggest audio show in the world. And what they do is it's classic big hotel built around an atrium. And for most of the demo rooms, they have demo room, empty room, demo room, empty room. So that makes that show quite good. What makes the Vienna venue really interesting is just the sheer amount of space that they have over above Munich. Munich was crammed in.
Really?
There was years worth of waiting lists if you wanted to exhibit there. Basically, every room, every square meter of floor space was taken, and they simply couldn't grow. And the new venue is definitely going to give them scope to grow. And it's a combination between rooms that are pre-built of different sizes, from ballroom type rooms, and I've got a few photos to share, all the way through to sort of small, medium-sized meeting rooms, then set up as a listening room. And it felt emptier, but I suspect it wasn't. I suspect in terms, and I haven't seen any official visitor numbers. You know, I'm not a hi-fi journalist. I'm not going to dig into these things, but I suspect it was actually quite busy. But the reason it didn't feel so busy is it was just more spread out, and there was just a lot more space, which was actually, in retrospect, really, really lovely. So it's a hi-fi show, and you know, most people can probably imagine what a hi-fi show is. And the interesting thing about the old Munich show and this Vienna show is the show's over 4 days, but the first 2 days are reasonably strictly business to business. So you could just trade only, with the Great Unwashed coming on the Saturday and the Sunday. And actually, every year, a lot of exhibitors choose to take a really, really small room or booth at the show just to meet and greet people, but their actual demos are off-site. And one of the reasons they choose to do that is if you take a demo room at the show, you're obliged to stay open for all 4 days. But they don't want to see the public. They're there to meet dealers, to meet distributors, to meet new customers. So they take a hotel suite, 5-10 minutes walk in one of the adjacent hotels and exhibit there. And this year there were quite a few big, significant manufacturers that were off-site. One thing about what I'm going to say today, I'm going to mention very, very few manufacturers, because I'm not going to be I'm going to be negative about one room, but I've hopefully anonymized it as much as I can. So if you recognize the stuff, you'll recognize the stuff. But I've taken all the brand names out of the photo. So I'm only going to be positive. Prepared. I'm only going to be positive about the things I'm going to be positive about. And I don't, this isn't, if you want to read about all the different rooms and what was going on, then go to one of the many fabulous hi-fi-ish websites, and they've got reviews and opinions of what they thought. What I kind of want to talk about today is this podcast is mainly an enthusiast with some professionals talking about theaters, talking about cinemas. It's really, really AV. And I'd just like to dig in and talk about, well, so what connection has a show like this got to do with what we do? It's so what? Why should people go? What can you find? What purpose is there to sort of take 3 or 4 days out of your schedule and go to a show like this? And I kind of think it's important. And one of the reasons that it's important is these shows are a tragically terrible place to go and listen to stuff. Now, I know that sounds ironic. Well, why else would you go to a hi-fi show if it isn't to listen to hi-fi? But the rooms are generally terrible. You don't have a lot of time for setup. This is a brand new venue. They've never used these rooms before, so they don't really understand them. People will be talking. So there's going to be loads of people in the room trying to listen, and a load of people around talking really, really loudly. The music probably isn't what you're familiar with. And it's, if you read anything by the absolutely fabulous Dr. Floyd Toole, he'll talk about the circle of confusion, which is using recorded music to evaluate systems, because you know nothing about the production chain. You don't know what EQ has been used. You don't know what it was mixed on. You don't know what it was mastered on. You don't know the preferences of the production people. So just by hearing a single piece of music, it's very, very, very difficult to make judgments on a system. You need to have a personal collection of, I know people that have got 3 tunes they play. I've got about 10. I know people that have got a playlist of 50, but stuff that you can hear again and again and again and again and again, and just build up that mental library of what does this sound like on different systems. And many of us, many of you, I'm sure, do that in the AV world, that you have your specific little clips that when you go somewhere you say, oh, could you play this? Because it's a great frame of reference. And that's important, just to build up that mental library. And I think I've talked about this before, but when I was doing a lot with a very, very big company in the Middle East, and our people went to shows, I gave them 3 instructions. 4. 1, go to every single active demo you can find on a show floor. Go to every single one. Make a note of what you really liked about it. Make a note of what you didn't like about it. And then the 4th line item, the single most important, make a note of, if you were to do this, what would you change? What would you do differently to make it better? And I think that's really important for AV and audio professionals, just to hear as much stuff as possible, and to build up that mental library of, different music on different systems, in different rooms, with different technologies, with different signal paths, just to give you that frame of reference. Because when we say that's really good, good is defined by our lifetime's experience. Good is, I think that's good. That's not objective. There's very little objectivity about an individual saying it's good. But the more frame of reference you can use to make that judgment, the better. So shows are a terrible place to listen, but they're also a great place to listen, just because you can listen to so much stuff. I went to, many years ago, when my liver was much younger and much more effective, I went to a wine tasting in London, and I've got tasting notes for 157 wines. And towards the beginning, they were quite detailed tasting notes. Towards the end, 100 onwards, it was nice, lovely, lush, whatever. And it's kind of like that. It shows that eventually you get a bit of fatigue, but the more stuff you can listen to, really, the better. Could I share my screen? Why don't I just share that, because it makes it easy to flip backwards and forwards? Can you see that? Fabulous. So this is the Austria Center. The weather was completely fantastic, which made evenings even better, because Austria, those that know me know I'm a bit of a beer nerd. I do like my beer, and Austria is a quite reasonable beer town for those sort of Germanic Eastern European beer styles. So the Austria Center, typical exhibition venue. And the other main reason I just love going to shows, and I know I wasn't going to talk about brands, and I haven't anonymized this, but hey ho, when it's got some of my best friends in the photo, it just kind of doesn't matter. The guy on the left is Maurizio Conti, my fabulous business partner at Officina Acustica and Cinema Bureau. There's then Eric from Perlison. There's then the completely incredible Rich Green. If ever you're at an industry event and get the chance to hear Rich speak, he is a futurist beyond anyone I know. He's amazing and a fabulous communicator. And that's Rich's sister, Liz, who's a professional musician. She teaches and plays violin and viola in Wisconsin in the US. And it's just great going to shows, bumping into people, bumping into friends, talking about stuff, checking up on how everyone's been. The really striking thing about this show, though, was, and this show in general, is just how few AV people there are there. There's a few enlightened ones and a few that cross over into sort of the more hi-fi side of things. But it is very, very, very much a hi-fi show. There were very, very few rooms that had any kind of video whatsoever. There were a few that were just making a half-assed attempt of it and just weren't very good. There were also some quite notable rooms that sounded, really good, and they were trying to do something completely different. More on that in a second. But going back to stuff and going there to listen, here is the one system that I've tried to anonymize. It was awful. It was, there are many rooms like this you walk into, and I'm actually just going to go back because I don't want to give people the time to go, oh, what's that? What's that? I'm going to research, because it kind of doesn't matter what equipment it is. And I'm sure in isolation, each one of those pieces of equipment is probably all right. It's probably pretty good. But whatever they were doing, and I walked in and I did a quick mental calculation of the sort of the value of this system, and it was a lot of money. I suspect this was a high six figures room just to play 2-channel. And you think, well, this is going to sound really good. It didn't. It was completely incoherent, and I couldn't believe it. So I stayed for another track, and I stayed for another track, and I listened to, excuse me a second. Got a bit of a cough, might have the odd cough break occasionally. I listened to, I think, about 4 songs in there, and it was just a completely incoherent mess of a system. And I just don't understand how experienced manufacturers, and with most of these rooms, it's not just one manufacturer. You might have a speaker manufacturer and a different amp manufacturer and a different DAC manufacturer and a supplier of cables and supplier of different source components all coming together to do this room. How they thought that room was good. And we should probably talk about this one day on a cast, and maybe actually get a professional psychologist in to explain what's going on here. But a lot of these rooms, people see this big, shiny, expensive, really, really well-reviewed gear and are pre-prepared for it to sound really good. And when it doesn't, they kind of don't believe their own ears, and they're sort of sitting there going, yeah, this is really good. And I just don't understand. And we all thought the same. It wasn't just me, for different parts of the show. I was wandering around with different friends, this lot that you see on the screen, a few others, and we all really, really interestingly agreed that within 10 seconds of walking into a room, we can make the judgment of, is this worth staying for?
I would agree.
Is this a room worth sitting down and actually staying for? And I know I said earlier, you can't evaluate a room just on one tune that you don't know, but you can certainly walk into a room and go, well, regardless of what the music is, what genre it is, how it's recorded, does it have a level of coherence and a level of low distortion, and more about distortion in a second, that is giving me the vibe that I actually want to sit down and listen to music. And I would say that 70%, no, let's rephrase that. 20% of the systems were completely terrible, just completely incoherent. Just, I've got Bluetooth speakers that sound better than these systems, genuinely, and we all agreed they were terrible. About 50%, they're okay. It was fine. It was making reasonably coherent sound, but it didn't really want to make you stay. It didn't really want to make you sit down and go, oh, there's something here. There's something interesting here. 30% of systems, 25% of systems were really, really good. You sat down and thought, okay, I understand why you're at a hi-fi show. This is, I can't reasonably, I could criticize it, but it's basically doing everything right. And then about 5% of things, I was sitting there going, wow, this is really cool. I'd really like to stay. And I enjoy, in a way, experiencing the bad stuff as much as I enjoy experiencing the really, really good stuff, because it just lets you build that mental library of what do different things sound like. So most of the exhibits were just plain 2-channel exhibits, with some really, really exceptionally notable exceptions. One of them was PMC. And PMC had 2 really, really big rooms. I only thought of taking a photograph of one of them. The other one, it didn't look remarkable. It was a pair of their big speakers and some amps and stuff. It didn't look great, but more on to that in a second. What PMC and another set of exhibitors I'll talk about in a second did that was different and wonderful is that, yeah, they're there to sell kit, but they actually made it about the music. So PMC had 2 rooms. This one was the PMC studio. And what's probably obvious from the photo is it was a multi-channel room. And what they were doing that was really, really, really cool is they had a number of music producers, musicians, who live were taking the individual stems, so the individual parts of the recording of a song, and live doing an Atmos mix with the audience kind of going, oh, what about this? Could you send that
cool.
to the LFE? How do you EQ this? Can you decorrelate that? And they were going, sure. So everyone was sitting there, and from individual stems, they were creating a mix. And then at the end, the musician went, well, this is how I imagined it. So the mix that was created on the day was played. The musician's mix was played, and they were completely different. And that's just so cool.
Yeah.
Because
I appreciate that, because it provides, I like when brands do that, because it provides an emphasis on, yeah, we're focusing on what you're doing with this instead of just on the equipment that is reproducing it. I think it's a sum of its parts. And if you don't focus on what you're actually creating, you're missing the boat. You're leaving so much out there. So I love demos like that. I wish I got to experience that. That's fantastic.
It was very, very cool. And I think the other thing it showed a lot of the 2-channel Luddites is that used properly, immersive as a creative tool, that you start with the same basic sounds, but how you deal with those spatially, it's just an amazing creative tool. And you know, they were doing some really cool stuff in that room. In the other room was just a very, very, very good and good sounding 2-channel setup. It's probably one of the ones I'd put in that 5%. But what they were doing there was completely different. They had a number of speakers, and the session I attended was a gentleman called Miles Showell, who is a mastering engineer with a speciality in vinyl. So Miles works at Abbey Road Studios in London. He's not a staff member, he's freelance, but that's where he has all his equipment. Abbey Road's famous, of course, from that very, very famous zebra crossing photo of the Beatles crossing it. It's one of the most history and storied recording facilities in the world. It's an amazing place. And Miles is an incredible analog mastering engineer. So he's the person that cuts the vinyl. So he's got his own Neumann cutting machine, which he plays around with and modifies and improves. And one of the things that he's a real specialist at is half-speed cutting, half-speed mastering. So the music is played at half speed. The cutting machine is run at half speed. So when you're listening to it live, it's just weird because you're listening to your music half speed. But half speed to half speed, when that's played at normal speed, it sounds perfect. And because you're cutting that vinyl disc at half the speed you would, you just get a more accurate transcription. It's got more time to cut all those details into the vinyl than if it was running at full speed. And the thing that completely blew me away is he played a master that he'd done at half speed of the song "A Day in the Life" by the Beatles, and he only cut 5 of these, and I literally had tears in my eyes. I'm almost welling up thinking about it because it just sounded so good. There was, you know, a bit of EQ. There was hardly any compression. It was a half-speed cut. And the other thing he did for that, which when you think about it, and I'm, you know, sorry for all you home theater geeks and nerds that I'm going deep into the analog world here, but it's really, really cool, is you know how most records play from the outside in? Well, think about it. On the outside, the rotational speed is much faster than on the inside of the piece of vinyl. So you're getting much more dynamic range and bandwidth on the outside tracks than you are in the middle. But what if over the side of a piece of vinyl, the music gets progressively louder and dynamic? Or what if in a single song, like "A Day in the Life," as you go through the song, it gets livelier and livelier and livelier? So this particular cut was mastered and cut from the inside out. So you put the needle down on the inside and it plays towards the outside. So as the song develops and you've got more dynamics and more bandwidth, you're getting more potential off that disc. Brilliant. I've rarely heard anything just so beautifully immediate and detailed. So yeah, that what PMC were doing at the show was a real highlight. And you know, regardless of if you like them in terms of equipment, I think companies like that need to be massively applauded for just bringing that connection with the music to the fore. The other collection of companies that did a multi-channel demo were Perlison, Trinov, and interestingly DCS. And if you're into your high-end audio, you'll know that DCS, they're a British company that makes some very, very high-end DACs, digital to analog converters. Now, that group of this room, and this is a picture that I took during setup. So we weren't involved; they're just friends. So we decided to bug them and give them an opinion that they probably didn't appreciate. Calibration by committee, it's terrible. So I was biting my tongue a lot, but they did a great job. That room sounded fantastic. They had a Grammy award-winning musician called Justin Gray presents some tracks from his latest album, and that album is available on lots of different platforms. Excitingly, it's also available on Kaleidoscape now, so that's definitely worth seeking out for those of you with a Kaleidoscape. The artist is Justin Gray. Sorry, I've forgotten the title of the album, but again, it was Justin talking about how this thing was recorded, how it was mixed, how it was mastered, and specifically how it was recorded for multi-channel. And it was fascinating. And it was fascinating then talking to Justin afterwards. And I had the privilege of going for dinner and then drinks after the show with him. Just talking about, you know, all the different ways that it gets from where it's being recorded to the final format, all the decisions that need to be taken. And one really cool conversation I had with him was Atmos is an object-based system, and an object has an XYZ coordinate. So in theory, it can be rendered into any 180-degree hemispherical space. But with a lot of music, rather than it being a true object, they pin that object to a specific channel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, really interesting talking to Justin about why he and a lot of music recordings do that. But in a lot of cinematic recordings, that's not done. They're left as pure objects. So, you know, those kinds of conversations during the session and then in the more social room outside were just really, really cool. And they were getting really, really good response at the show. When we were sort of roundabout in that area, they were doing their demos, I think, twice an hour for 15 minutes. So 2 demos an hour. And twice an hour, you could hear a big applause from the audience. So a lot of these people that were only really used to 2-channel music, for the first time ever, hearing really, really, really well recorded stuff that was made specifically for immersive, in a really good sounding, well dialed in system, they were blown away. So I think certainly for professionals like me, other installation companies, immersive music is a big opportunity. It really, really is. It's the next dimension to music. There's a lot of content out there at the moment. Some of it, a lot of the stuff that's being redone for Apple, is a little frivolous. It's a little Atmos for the sake of Atmos. But then you look at the stuff that Justin Gray's doing and other musicians, and that stuff's recorded specifically to be played back in immersive. It's absolutely wonderful, and it adds another dimension. So Perlison did the speakers, Trinov did the processing and the amplification. There was a projector and a screen, but you know, they kind of weren't important. The other partner in that demo were DCS, who have come out with a 16-channel DAC. And this, from a very, very traditional 2-channel hi-fi company, that's really, really cool. The idea is that if your processor has the ability, and all the high-end ones do, to output digital, then rather than use the relatively mass-produced DACs inside your AV processor, you use a very sophisticated, very expensive external DAC. I couldn't do a demo of it because, you know, hearing this is what it sounds like before and after the DAC, but there definitely was something to that room. There was just a sense of ease, a sense of timing, a sense of musicality that you don't often hear in multi-channel rooms. So how much of that was down to the DAC, I have no idea, but that was a very, very sweet sounding room.
Oh, they also support, looks like, the DB25 cables from Trinov, which is interesting.
Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense using DB25 connectors, because 16 input connectors, well, 8 input connectors and 16 output connectors is a lot of connectors. So just from a real estate on the back of a piece of equipment, an ease of connection, you're unlikely to get channels transposed or wire things up incorrectly. Using DB25s is a really, really neat way of wiring this stuff up. I definitely approve. There were some other really, really interesting rooms at the show. This is a Chinese company called ESD. Every year they come to the show with probably the biggest stuff. I think this system, don't quote me on it, and excuse me while I have a cough break. I think this system was $4 or $5 million.
Good Lord.
And it sounded as huge as it looks. I saw this system and I saw the room and I was really quite skeptical, but the sense of scale that this system was able to reproduce while I was there, they played a very, very, very famous living stereo recording of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. And these recordings were recorded with actual real cannons, you know, those booms were actual real cannons. And it's known as being one of the widest dynamic range recordings ever made. And it sounded fantastic. And I guess you could criticize the system. It definitely sounded like some big horns. But if you have a customer who wants to make a statement, they've got a big, huge room, it's great. You know, it certainly does make a statement. And I think, you know, hi-fi shows are wonderful because you don't hear this stuff every day. You can't just turn up to your local dealer and go hear systems like this and spaces like this. And, you know, to have the privilege to hear this really, really big stuff is really, really cool. Lots of manufacturers with lots of expensive speakers. I just adore these, the way these look. They're out of a science fiction movie. This is Goldman, Swiss company. The look of these speakers, I mean, they've refined and refined and refined the design, but the look of them hasn't changed in a very, very long time. And again, I love seeing just how manufacturers are trying to be different aesthetically. What I do every day of my life is I don't want speakers to be seen. We spend a huge amount of time hiding things because when you've got multi-channel, our eyes override our ears in terms of spatially locating things. So we want to fool our ears and not see speakers. But I just love looking at these beautiful sculptural things. This is a speaker by a company called Linkwitz. And if you're into audio, you'll know who Mr. Linkwitz was. Every show I go to, these just sound fantastic. They're a completely open baffle design, a dipole, highly refined over many years. And again, hi-fi shows are great because you can look at something and go, oh, that's never going to work, is it? And you listen to it and go, oh, that's really cool. And then you can speak to the people there and, you know, figure out what's going on. Why does this sound good? So shows, you know, they're not just about wandering around, listening to things, leaving. They're also about engaging the people that are there and having some really, really good conversations. Mark Levinson JBL rather, they've come out with their new Everest speakers. That horn that you can see, there's actually 3 2-inch compression drivers going into a chamber that sort of combines all 3 and then into the waveguide and out of a horn. And I certainly give them the prize for playing it the loudest. And, you know, it was quite bold of them, I think, to play the music they were playing as loud as they were playing it, and showed that for certain types of customers, these could be absolutely just the ticket. The complete, well, almost the extreme to this. I actually didn't. I've got the brochures somewhere, but I didn't make that much note of the manufacturers. There was this system. So this is, you know, incredibly efficient, incredibly high power, horn loaded. You know, it would do as well. It would be just as good as a club system as it would playing a little string quartet. This system, I certainly wouldn't use it for a club system. These are full range drivers with a little whizzer cone in the middle. I think the drivers, again, I could be completely wrong, are made by a company called Lowther. And this system just sounded wonderful. It's a classic audiophile system, very, very simple, short signal path, Class A valve amplifier. They were playing vinyl. Does it go loud? No. Does it do macro dynamics? Not really. Is it the last word in neutrality? Absolutely not. But there's systems like this. Sometimes they just come together. And as you can see there, they were playing Ben Webster, which is jazz. I could have sat there for hours. I really could have sat in front of this system for hours. It just had a sense of timing and ease, a sense of connection with the record that is really, really rare these days.
You know, I think that's interesting that these two, I don't think you did it intentionally, that the JBLs and these are right next to each other, and you liked them both. And the point I was going to make is speakers, a lot of speakers can be really good, and you do not have to necessarily go for a speaker that is capable of playing insanely loud. Like, I would bet these speakers aren't able to do that, but as long as you keep them within their capabilities, you can have a fantastic experience. Like you so often say and preach, is you need to use a tool to reach a means. And if you're using the incorrect tool that's going to deliver something that is against what you're trying to do and not delivering to your expectation, you're leaving a lot on the table, and you're going to have maybe an unknown to you bad time. But if you use things within their capabilities to reach an experience that you're trying to have, there's a lot more out there than people may think that is good. But looking at a spec, if somebody's saying, oh, it needs to do this, this, and this, and you're not after that, doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. And it actually was completely intentional to put them side by side for exactly the reasons you were describing, Ryan. And what I would love, you know, I live in a 4-bedroom semi-detached Victorian house. This house was built in 1899. Anyone that knows what a 3-bedroom with a loft extension semi-detached Victorian house is, you could draw my floor plan, because they're all the same, and the rooms aren't big, and we have enough space. But you know, it is what it is. I would love one day to have a big rambling house with lots and lots of rooms and have a hi-fi system in every single one of them, because a really good system should be able to play everything. And you can find that balance of compromise, but it's really nice to have specialist little systems for different types of music. And talking about specialist, pretty much every single year this guy turns up, and it's usually my favorite room of the show. And this year didn't disappoint. Audium is a recorded hi-fi museum in Seoul in South Korea. I'm not sure if it's open to the public. I think it is, but you've got to book. You can't just turn up. And every year this guy turns up with different Western Electric speakers. Excuse me again. And this year, you know, again, it's just the most wonderful sounding thing, and it's powered by these. And if those amps are more than 2 watts per channel, I'd be surprised. You know, the sense of dynamics and scale, it's really, really colored. You know, it makes everything sound like a horn. I'd hate to look at the frequency response, but none of that matters. It just has this immediacy, this sense of dynamism that sometimes makes me think, so in the last 80 years since these were made, 75, 80 years since these were made, have we really improved? You know, has has hi-fi really got better? And yeah, in many ways, it absolutely has. But again, hi-fi shows are fantastic to go and listen to this weird and wonderful stuff that you just don't have the opportunity of hearing elsewhere. You can't buy these. They're in, well, you probably can. Most things are for sale at the right price, but these are very, very rare and genuinely I suspect these are about 80 years old, but don't quote me on that. The amps you can buy, they're a manufacturer called Silbertone, and they're the ones that have the room every year. But yeah, stuff like this is just I probably sat there for about half an hour, which for a hi-fi show is a long time. Just listening to music. They played everything from some really obscure German vocal music to Led Zeppelin to string quartets to they played a Beatles track. You know, it was really, really fantastic. One of my favorite things at the show, and this is going into the realms of absolute affordability. Does anyone here remember the Audio Technica Soundburger? Do you remember a Soundburger, Ryan?
I do not.
Maybe
not under that name, but
well, Soundburger was the vinyl equivalent of a Sony Walkman, so it was a portable record player.
No.
Yep, and look it up, Audio Technica Soundburger, and Thorens have reinvented the portable player. So when it's not in use, Maurizio's hand is just there for scale. The arm and the stylus push into the unit and they supply it with a little carrying case. It's got line out. It's also got Bluetooth out. So if you want to go and have a picnic on the beach and take some Bluetooth speakers, you can go spin your vinyl on the beach. I mean, does it sound good? It sounds fine. It's absolutely fine. It's not going to damage your records. And I just love stuff like this. When it goes on sale, I'm very, very, very likely going to buy one. Will I ever use it? I have no idea. But you know, when I did have my Twitter X account, which I don't anymore, my handle was Get More Gadgets, and this is a wonderful audio gadget. I love stuff like that. Just quickly wrapping up. One of my missions there is we have a customer at the moment that wants to buy a really, really high-end turntable. So I was quite focused on high-end turntables, and this was by far my favorite. This is by a company called Wilson Benesch, who are based in Sheffield in the UK. And from an engineering perspective, it just blew my mind. I asked them many, probably quite annoying questions, and they answered every single one of them with an engineering reason. And that's really rare and completely beautiful. So everything about that turntable, there is an engineering reason about why they did it. The if you look there, you can see the very, very heavy platter the record sits on, and then that's the bit that goes round and round and round. Then underneath it, you can see some coils. So this is kind of more of a close-up of that. So the whole platter is the motor itself. It's direct drive, but you can just see the level of brutally big, wonderful engineering. It's expensive, but for once I look at it and with my engineering hat on, I go, yeah, I can actually see where the money and where the precision has gone. And again, hi-fi shows are just fantastic to, if you're into audio engineering, how things work, go to them, ask questions. Some people, they're just salespeople. They won't be able to answer the questions. But, in Wilson Benesch's case, I went quite deep and they were able to answer every single question. So huge kudos to them. And I'm done, Ryan.
Okay. Well, perfect timing because I have to go. I have to take a car in to get work done. But I'm glad we were able to live vicariously through you to attend at least a small portion of the Vienna Audio Show. I would like to go there one day.
Can you unshare the photo so we can see your lovely face again?
Oh, yes.
Or do I need to do that?
I think I can. this. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Everybody's really here to see your face, not my face. That's the reality of it. But thanks for.
I think record players are way prettier than my face.
Yeah, record, especially that one. That one looks every bit of whatever that thing costs. I wouldn't be surprised whatever that thing costs, but hopefully you were able to find something that worked for the client, worked for the customer, and that was what they were looking for.
I think we have.
Good. But thanks again for taking us through that. I have never been to Munich, the Munich audio show. I've never been to now the Vienna audio show, so hopefully I'll be able to do that in the future. But coming from a little bit further away than you are or were, it makes it a little more difficult. But it's always surprising how many companies from all over the world are there and how far some come from in order to attend and exhibit and do those things. Even just attend is astounding how far some people come for those shows. But thank you again for filling in for Ben. He was working on, I think, some stuff on a ceiling. Was it at Foundry or was it his own personal?
It's at Foundry, and it's our fault as Officina Acustica because we've got some new stuff that we've given to Ben and Christian to say, please install this, and then we've done a runner and left them to it. So thank you, Ben and Christian. Appreciate it.
Well,
and I can answer one question one question will take a while. One question I can answer really quickly from Big Street Cinema. Did you get the price of that DAC? They haven't officially announced it yet, but talking to the people there, they reckon between 60 and 70,000.
That's what I saw online. It was about 60,000. Yeah. It was speculation. There was no released MSRP, but that's what we saw. So, well, thanks again for everybody for joining. I know this one was a little bit different. We are going to be talking about maybe quiet again next week. I don't know where we're going to go. I know I wanted to do how can you make an existing room quieter without ripping it apart. But then Ben had to step away and Peter stepped in. So we made a little pivot called an audible.
I can give you an answer to that with extreme difficulty.
Yes, no doubt. But it is something to chat about. So thanks again, Peter. Thanks for joining us. Everybody enjoy those home theater journeys. I know this was a little bit different than what we do, but hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Stay safe. See you later.